My VTuber and streaming setup has become pretty intense. Multi-streaming, Twitch's vertical alpha, 3 VTubers, and a virtual room has made it so that even a 5090 doesn't cut it. So I've started experimenting with running multiple GPUs in one system. In this video, I'd like to walk you through what I've learned by doing all of this insane PC stuff. When I started out researching multi-GPU streaming setups, the first and pretty much only video I ever found was this one by E+Vox. And basically his conclusion was that it is never worth it to use 2 GPUs. However, I have found that for me, that's not the case, but there are some very important caveats. First, we need to talk about PCIe lanes. Despite using your eyes and seeing that your motherboard has like 4 PCIe slots, this does not mean that you can plug stuff into every slot and everything will work well. There are 2 things that you have to understand. First is the physical slot itself. Each slot will support a generation of PCIe as well as how many lanes it supports. For the generation, this will be described by your motherboard. We're currently on Gen 5. How the system is designed is that 5.0 at 16 lanes has twice as much bandwidth as 4.0 at 16 lanes. Also, 5.0 at 8 lanes has the same bandwidth as 4.0 at 16 lanes. However, these are theoretical limits. In actuality, the difference of performance between a card running at 4.0 at 16 and 5.0 at 16 is about 3% as referenced by this Gamer's Nexus video. The second is that your motherboard and CPU combination have a maximum number of lanes they support. For AM4, AM5, and whatever the hell Intel is on, the maximum is 24. So for example, if you're looking to use 2 16 cards at their full bandwidth, that is 2 times 16, which is 32, which is greater than 24.
Quick maths.
So you're going to need to go Threadripper or some server level motherboard. That's just how it is, especially considering that M2 drives also take up PCIe lanes. Now, this isn't to say that you can't shove in a cheeky 3050 or ARC card that runs at ×8, but you do need to be aware of the limit of your system. Once you put in your cards, it can be helpful to verify that you're actually getting the bandwidth you're expecting. For this, I use HW Info. It'll show you what slot the GPU is in, as well as the actual bandwidth it's running. However, some cards will run at lower bandwidth when they're at less load, so make sure you're running OBS or a game or something else that is using the card so you can see the maximum bandwidth. This drove me nuts for a while because I was using a 5090 and it was showing it was at ×4 instead of the full ×16, so make sure you're running something that will actually use the card. Let's say you properly configured your system and all your cards and everything are running at the right bandwidth. You might now ask, how do I run certain programs on certain graphics cards? And I think the easiest thing for this is to go into the Windows settings, then graphics. Here it's going to list a bunch of programs and you can basically tell it what GPU to go to. Now, this is not ideal for programs that you're looking to capture inside of OBS. You're pretty much going to be unable to use all the capture sources if they aren't on the same GPU. For VTubers, the big one is that Spout's not going to work. So don't move a program to a different GPU unless you do not plan on capturing it in OBS. For example, I use some stream automation software called Sammy, and it takes up a little bit of GPU. I've moved this to another GPU and everything has been totally fine. However, you might find you've set the setting, but if you go into Task Manager, it's still taking up resources on the main GPU. In this case, what you need to do is basically have all of those windows be on another monitor that is plugged into the GPU that you want. Now, buying another monitor in this economy after you've bought another GPU is not so great, so what you could do is buy a dummy plug. No, Gendo, not that dummy plug. This is a dummy plug and basically it acts as another monitor, but you can't see the output. So what you can do is move all those windows you want on the second GPU over to that monitor and they'll render over there. Now, you might need to refresh the task manager to actually see them running on the correct GPU, so keep that in mind. The second thing that you can do is to move encoding over to a second GPU. Now, it is true that the encoder is a separate bit of hardware from the rest of the GPU. However, if you're multi-streaming, doing Twitch enhanced broadcasting, and recording locally using separate encoders, you are going to run into 2 things. First, NVIDIA limits the amount of encoding processes on consumer cards to 8. You can modify the drivers, or get an RTX Pro workstation card, or run another GPU. The second thing is that even if you don't run out of processes, you might actually overload the encoder. Unfortunately, Twitch does not let you change where the encode happens if you're using enhanced broadcasting. However, you can limit the number of tracks that this uses, but this may result you in losing steps in the ladder, which means you'll have less resolutions and frame rates for your viewers. This sucks and there's no way around it. However, for your other streams, you can select the GPU and change it from -1 to whatever graphics card you want. This does not necessarily line up what's in the task manager, so do a test to make sure it's going to the right place. So, do I recommend this to most people? Hell no, it's far too expensive and probably not worth it. However, I did want to put something out because there isn't really a video out there that you can point someone to besides the old one from Epos Vox. I think with more people multi-streaming than ever before, especially using the ADEM plugin instead of relying on something like Restream, more people might consider doing something like this when they run into issues. So that'll be it for me. I'll see you guys later. Bye.